Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagen. We are back here in Studio 130. John Hendrickson and myself for another fun-filled, action-packed episode. See if I can spit this out, John. Iowa's gold standard conservative podcast talking about Iowa being the gold standard in tax reform.
That's right, yeah.
And this is going to be a gold standard episode.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've got exciting news today. And so what we're going to get into, John, is an agreement, it appears, between House and Senate Ways and Means chairman on some tax policy, which is really good.
It is, yeah.
It is. So we hopefully can get this out a little earlier than, we're actually going to get this released in time for what the schedule is supposed to be. It'll be early compared to how often usually on Friday we've gotten these done. Yeah. So anyway, I'd like to kick things off with a little bit of something else before we get into the substance of what we came to talk about today, and sometimes lighthearted, but this one's actually pretty serious, and I don't know that we've got a lot to report on it yet. But picking up on what we've talked about in a couple of recent episodes. I just saw this press release. Governor Reynolds to join Texas Governor Abbott for border security press conference and host a press briefing in Iowa. But she will be traveling, it appears, to Eagle Pass, Texas, to appear on a press conference with several other governors from around the country. And so that will be, and then she'll have another press briefing here in Iowa when she gets back. But this issue is not going away.
No, it's not. No.
And I think you and I both appreciate Governor Reynolds' leadership.
Absolutely.
On the issue. So we'll be probably more to report on that in future episodes. So I don't know if you'd seen that, but
I saw it just come across the email, but I haven't read that yet.
Well, good. Well, the main event though today is this. So saw this morning. You had forwarded that Senator Dan Dawson, chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, had released some new tax bills. And we had a kind of include in that he was going this direction, and that there is an agreement. This is the result of discussions between him and the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the Iowa House, who is Representative Bobby Kaufman, both who are good friends of ours, friends of the organization, spoke at our ITR NFIB Tax Day. And they've got the outlines of a plan, not even outlines, they've got a bill that has been dropped. And so we're here to talk about it today.
Yeah.
Just in general, we're gonna dig into what they've said about this. They held a joint press conference today, what they said, what their intention is, and what it actually does. But I mean, what's your first impressions of all this, John?
I think this is very historic. I mean, we'll get into the details of the bill, but just and I think you'll be able to comment better than I can on this. But to have both chambers kind of do this together, to me, seems to be very unique.
Well,
and as we look at the details, it certainly is a historic plan.
That's right. It is. Look, we have two chambers of our legislature for a reason, right? They don't all just agree on everything, nor should they, right? You want there to be a conversation about it, and there has been here. When we've done these tax bills in the past, they have been the result of negotiation and back and forth, and to see this sort of agreement on a bill, and it will likely change a little bit. They always do, but here on February 1st is really, I agree with you, John. I think it is significant and bodes very well for the prospects for this bill. If you've got this sort of buy-in from both chairmen, I suspect that you will see this or some version similar to this move forward through the legislature.
Yes.
And what's also driving this a little earlier this year is that this bill will adjust the tax rates for tax year 24, the year we're in.
Yes.
And so there is an interest in getting to it quickly for those so they can do their tax planning for the year that we're in, because it will go back to an effective date of January 1 of 2024. So
Yes,
that's part of the reason to get it done early. So we should very briefly, we're going to get deeper into the mechanics, but I want to set the stage for this. So we had a bill from Governor Reynolds that she had talked about at her condition of the state, which was an acceleration and a lower of rates.
Yes, yeah.
And hers actually went a little accelerated faster and went a little deeper than this one, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay. This one, however, has ultimately a path, and it might take quite a while to get there, ultimately a path towards elimination of the income tax.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we're talking about is a different acceleration and reduction strategy, but also with the elimination and a couple of constitutional amendments that I want to make sure that we definitely talk to today. So just quickly on what Kaufman and Dawson had to say on this. And one thing that, and I don't know if you picked up on this, John, as you were reading through this, they both talk about this idea that it's a once in a lifetime opportunity or a one-time opportunity. I thought that was interesting. That was both of them mentioning that.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of where that's coming from?
I do, and I actually agree with that because I think the situation that Iowa is in right now, we've been running multiple surpluses the last several fiscal years, and we have a enormous balance in the taxpayer relief fund. Mm-hmm. And so the situation, I don't want to say is perfect, but close to perfect. The fiscal foundation of the state is very strong, even with all the national economic problems. Iowa is in very strong shape. And so I think all this has set up a scenario where Iowa has a unique opportunity. In fact, I would say a historic opportunity to do long-term, permanent pro-growth tax reforms.
Chairman Kaufman, in his statement here, spoke exactly to that point, John. Said, since 2017, we have been budgeting conservatively and responsibly, passing a number of historic tax relief bills, all while filling our reserves in the taxpayer relief fund. These decisions brought us to where we are today. And we've been really trying to hammer that point that it started with the conservative budgeting. Mm-hmm. And so he absolutely understands that very well. And then Senator Dawson here talking about putting Iowa on a stronger path to prosperity and to protect the tax cuts we've passed over the last several years, bringing more predictability to Iowa families. So knowing that these are coming, I think, is also an important point too. So we are fortunate to have this kind of leadership on tax policy that also understand that the fiscal stewardship is an important component of it.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So, now I'm going to have to lean on you a little bit here, John. Walk us through, well, we touched briefly on the governor's plan, which was to get us to a 3.5 flat tax. It would have collapsed those rates down to the flat tax immediately, I believe.
It would, yeah. So just a quick review of the governor's plan for if this year she calls for a flat tax to be implemented of 3.65%. Mm-hmm. And then immediately next year, 2025, would fall to 3.5%.
Okay. And then so this release today, House and Senate bill would do what?
And so in tax year 24, it would pretty much keep the rates the same, except the lowest rate. We would still have 3 brackets, but the lowest rate would go from 4.4 to 3.9, and the top rate would be 5.7. But then when we get into tax year 25, the House and Senate plan lowers it to 2 rates, 3.9 and 4.82. And then in 2026, it falls to a flat 3.75%. And then in 2027 falls to 3.65%, which would be lower than the 3.9 that it's under current law.
Right.
What it's supposed to do.
So what really, the House and Senate bill from today does move us faster towards collapsing those rates down to the flat tax and get it lower.
Yes. Yep.
And takes us lower. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked about this, but I'm going to slow down and try and spell this out again. When we pass these rate cuts, there is understandably less revenue that comes into the state. Now we're running a budget surplus. We have the room to absorb that reduction in revenue, but in the short term, it does require some filling back up, which was where the taxpayer relief fund comes in.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want to say this. Do you spend the taxpayer relief fund and the budget surplus money in the near term to get the rates as low as quickly as possible and getting those dollars back out to Iowans? Mm-hmm. Or do you hold on to those dollars in large part to help smooth out the reductions in revenue in the out years to hopefully achieve an even lower rate down the road? So I think that's the tension here. And there is not, I can't say that one's the more conservative position or the other. I've talked to folks that are passionate about tax relief that land on different sides of that. So, but it seems to me that at least what Dawson and Kaufman are trying to do here is try to preserve more of those surplus taxpayer relief fund dollars for use in the out years.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a sense of what these rates are. And here's the really good news. Like, we're probably getting something around all of this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And, from our corner over here as an organization is if the final bill that comes out of here is around all of this, Iowans should be really excited about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is good news for taxpayers.
Rather than get down into the details of a 3.65 or a 3.5 or a 3.9 or what year. Yeah, that matters a little bit. But to think about where we are on the back end of all of that is really exciting stuff.
Yes,
and so we are very supportive of the governor, the House, and the Senate and all their work to get this done, because it sure does look like we're going to get another really good tax bill this year.
Yeah, and I was looking, and if I did this right, and I was looking at just tax rates, if we either land on 3.5 or 3.65, I think we would have the 5th lowest income tax in the nation of the states that levy an income tax. Yeah. So that's pretty incredible.
And it's even more incredible when you consider how far we've come.
That's right. Yeah.
So in order to accomplish this, so there's something that's really new in this. And I want you to, like, the way that, in the past we've sort of had, okay, well, we've got all this money parked on the sidelines. How are we going to deploy it, and move it over? But this plan has some new stuff in it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and so the first part of the plan we kind of went over already is it accelerates existing rate cuts, and that's something that we wrote about in our foundation report as well. But what it does is the House and Senate plan, as you mentioned, takes sort of the long-term approach by not just quitting when it hits a flat rate, but will then use the taxpayer relief fund to gradually continue to lower rates, but eventually the end goal is to eliminate the income tax. And what they do here is they've created sort of an interesting mechanism to do this. And so the taxpayer relief fund, of course, has an enormous amount of money in there, as we've talked about before many times. And so what they're proposing to do is one. I think this is great because I think it honors the original intent of the taxpayer relief fund, which is using that money for income tax relief. So what they're going to do is basically create what's called a taxpayer relief trust, and a portion of that, about $3 billion, will be transferred into that, which will create what's being called the income tax elimination fund, and this will be administered through IPERS. And there will be a special, the language in the bill has, in a sense, rules and stuff of who will be overseeing that and so forth. But so what the mechanism will do is, over time, the money that goes into the taxpayer relief fund will then flow into the income tax elimination fund, which will then be used to do two things. One, as that account continues to get full, once certain mechanisms are hit, it will slowly ratchet down those rates.
Right.
And so they also do this prudently as well, because once that rate gets lowered, then a portion of that goes into the general fund as well to sort of cushion the blow. And there's a trigger tied to that. And this is, I hope it doesn't get too confusing, but there is a trigger in order this to happen. That is, they tie it to the sales and use tax. So basically, if in that fiscal year, and I believe this will kick in 2028, is when this process will actually get started. Once the sales and use tax revenue is 3% higher than previous year, that then triggers the mechanism to start using that income tax elimination fund to sort of gradually lower the rate.
And the reason for that is, if the state of Iowa no longer has an individual income tax, or one that is shrinking, which it is, the sales and use tax is the bulk of the remaining revenue into the state.
Yeah.
And so, and Dawson and Kaufman talk about this in their release about this being sustainable and being able to do this and predictable.
Yeah.
Is that when the sales and use tax grows to a point where the state can now shoulder an additional reduction in income tax revenue, we'll go ahead and do it. And so that's the whole idea of the trigger. You trigger in the new rates.
Yes, yep.
And I want to go back to, John, to this taking these funds and put them over under the management at IPERS. And there's a reason for that. And we don't do that already. Right now, it's just sort of parked in the state treasury in wherever mythical corner of the state capitol we stack, billions of dollars. I'm not quite sure it works that way, but
it could be in Al Gore's lockbox.
Yeah, well, we you know what, we should get State Treasurer Robbie Smith in here to tell us where do they stack the where do they stack it all up yet. But anyway, the is that let's invest these dollars rather than just park there on the sideline. Let's get a rate of return off of it, and so rather than giving it to somebody's local financial advisor do it, which I'm sure they could do a good job, or investing in meme stocks, or I don't know, whatever else people like to do with their money. The folks that really are charged with investing for the state of Iowa is at IPERS, and they probably can get the right mix of growth and some safety in that, the right balance of risk and growth. So I think that's a really shrewd move. And I don't know what the average rate of return is that they have pegged at IPERS, but we can get some. And so it's that earnings growth, almost creating an endowment for the state of Iowa, for the taxpayers to start getting some more relief.
It is. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so maybe they'll even come up with some new creative names down the road.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're going to put the money in there. It grows and earns money, and then we'll pull that out for those years when the state can afford or can shoulder rate reductions. We'll pull that money back out, lower the rate, and carry on, all in a very affordable for the state, for its budget, in a responsible manner. So the state continues to fund its core obligations.
Yes.
And we're not, as we've talked over and over, John, we're not going to get in a spot where we spend so much money that we have to ask for more from the taxpayers, nor are we just going to cut rates and hope that we can figure it out on the back end.
Yeah.
This is the kind of smart policy that you have to put in place to be able to make significant tax rate reductions and still afford it.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, because a lot of people think, well, why can't you just eliminate it? Income tax overnight, and you just can't do that. It's just not realistic. And so what they've done here, I think, is implemented in a sense, a very prudent way to not just accelerate the rates to get to a low flat tax, but also they put a path forward to continue to lower the rates. So, it may take a while, like you said, but we will see significant tax relief as a result of this, and it'll be done very responsibly.
Yeah.
And then it'll have enough time where the state budget can adjust to switching to relying heavily on, or basically a majority of it, on the sales and use tax.
Yeah, and I'm going to, I guess, stay on this point for a minute. In my conversations with legislative leaders and legislators broadly, they all are committed. And this isn't just spin. They all are committed to doing things responsibly. They truly don't want to cut in a way that jeopardizes the future of the state of Iowa. Because it is possible, as you just mentioned, that we could just charge into something, and then you wake up 3 or 4 years from now, and all of a sudden you have a dire situation. And maybe it would work out even further down the road, but you would be faced with spending decisions that you're not ready to make.
Yeah.
Now, maybe some of those cuts, I mean, as good fiscal conservatives, we would like to make someday, but it's proper planning, and they all are very, I can tell you it is genuine. They truly want to make that a component of tax cuts.
Yeah.
Is that we do it the right way.
I know there's some critics of triggers, and there's multiple ways to use a trigger, but I actually think it's actually good policy because it provides that cushion. Because we have to keep in mind that Iowa and many states have to balance their budget, and we can't be like the federal government and run deficits, and so we have to be very careful in how we do tax cuts, and a trigger is just a protective mechanism that can, in a sense, prevent a budget crisis from happening.
Well, there's different ways to construct those triggers too. Yep. And in my mind, they need to be easily achievable.
That's right, yeah.
And, when we did the triggers in the 2018 bill, they ended up working. We got close and we removed the triggers, but it was an arbitrary number. This percent of a growth, this total revenue number, you get the new rate. Yeah. And the problem we found out is we got really close to it, but we just weren't quite there. But the state was doing great, and it was appropriate to do it, but it took an additional act of the legislature. I think what the model is here is more of like a rolling recalculation of the rate. Much like we have seen implemented on the corporate rate.
Yes, yep.
As things go, we just sort of rebalance this going along, and that might be an oversimplification of it. But we get to a point where it sort of happens just by formula, then reaching these arbitrary stair steps along the way. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good example. In fact, the corporate tax, the way they've done that is a good example of, I think, of a trigger mechanism that works because one, it provides certainty and it's easy to follow and it has worked. Yeah. If revenue exceeds $700 million, the rate goes down, and so it's and we've seen other states do this successfully. I mean, North Carolina has used triggers, not similar to what we're doing, but in a way that's similar, but has done that successfully. And I think the way they're using the taxpayer relief fund, in a sense, turning it into this new trust, is a responsible way to move forward. And like I said, one thing I've been worried about is just making sure that the original 10 of that fund has been preserved. And so that's one thing I'm really excited about. Yeah. Is that because that money belongs to the taxpayer. And so I think what they're doing is exactly correct.
So I want to get to these constitutional amendments. And one of the things that's not in these constitutional amendments, which was proposed last year, was constitutionally protecting the taxpayer relief fund.
Yes, yeah.
And I think, and this is based off of some of the conversations that I've had, is when those dollars are transferred to IPERS for management, they are encumbered. And so they're tied up. They might not be tied up constitutionally, but right now they're just sitting in an account that any act of the legislature could withdraw.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because when I was reading the language of the bill this afternoon, it did say that these funds cannot be used for the general fund.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose, look, it's the state legislature writes the laws of the state. And if they want to write a law to pull some of those money, that I suppose they could, but it may come with a tremendous penalty, or once it clearly established they're over there. I do think that does provide a layer of protection. So, but going on to what these two constitutional amendments that are proposed, one from that I believe we saw last year, and then a new one this year. So walk us through that.
Yeah. So the two amendments that are being introduced, one is similar to last year, and that is it would require a supermajority or 2/3 requirement of both houses of the legislature to increase either the individual or corporate income tax. And I think that's a very good taxpayer protection, and it's not something that's unique. About 16 other states currently have a provision. Some of those even have it within their constitution, which if that's the route we would, I would be one of those states. And so a 2/3 majority would make it would make it harder for a future legislature to increase taxes.
Much harder.
And also it would force the legislature to justify to the taxpayers why they want to increase taxes, and it would force them to sort of build a bipartisan coalition in order to do that. So it
almost certainly would have to have a bipartisan coalition to raise taxes. The Senate right now has a 2/3 majority, but the House does not. They're both close, but yeah, it would just make it very difficult, a really high bar. And force, only that would happen when there really were no other choices. And I believe there's always other choices.
Yes, absolutely.
There's always some places you can go besides raising taxes.
Yes, yeah.
So that'd be good.
Yeah. And the second one is a new proposal, which would basically make the flat tax constitutional. And so this would prohibit a future legislature of reverting back to a progressive income tax. And so what we mean by progressive income tax is multiple rate brackets. And that's something that we're phasing out now. And I would argue that a flat tax is much more better, much more efficient, much more fair for all taxpayers. And so this would be a good protection because it would ensure that, we do not go back to the high tax rates that we're finally getting out of.
That's right. I mean, just to cement this flat tax, not necessarily the rate, but just the fact that it would be, had to be flat, had to be fair for everyone.
Yeah.
So again, as a reminder on constitutional amendments in Iowa, and I think most of the folks that really follow this stuff probably understand this, it's pretty hard to amend the Constitution in Iowa. We don't have ballot initiatives like you see in other states where you go get a petition signed and you get to vote in on a law. Is that here you have a resolution in front of the legislature where it has to pass both the House and the Senate, but not get the governor's signature. Actually, on constitutional amendments, the governor does not play a role in this. So it would pass the House and the Senate in 2 consecutive General Assemblies. That's not 2 consecutive years. A General Assembly is defined as a 2-year period. So in this case, if they pass this year, it would then need to be passed again by the legislature in either 25 or 26, and then presumably be on the ballot for Iowans to vote on, just a 50% majority vote on the general election ballot in 2026. It doesn't necessarily have to follow that timeline, but that's where it would go. So if this all worked, Iowans would have be able to weigh in directly on this question in November of 26, which is actually not that far away anymore.
No, it isn't. No,
frighteningly, a little over 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So this would be a year, because if they don't do it this year, now you're looking at 4 years out, because you have to do it in 25 and then either 27 or 28. So I suspect that if there is real interest in this, they'll need to get it done yet this year.
Yeah. And I think both amendments are good ideas. And, it's been said before, I think Senator Dawson has made the comment that, there's other funds in the Constitution that are protected, but there's no protections for the taxpayer.
That's right.
And this would actually remedy that.
Well, I guess to kind of put a bow on all of this, Iowa taxpayers should continue to be thrilled at the leadership from the governor, from legislative leaders, to Chairman Dawson, to Chairman Kaufman, because clearly, I mean, just read their words, not just in a press release, but the words they're put on a piece of paper in the form of a tax bill. They're serious about this stuff.
Absolutely.
And they continue. They're not missing an opportunity. And it started since 2017. They had this opportunity. We've heard Senator Whitver talk about, we came into a legislative trifecta and we were going to take advantage. We weren't going to miss the opportunity. And yet conservatives are now in year 7 of that, and they're still not missing out on the opportunity. So I think it's great. I'm just from my spot watching this, as I said earlier, I'm confident that we are going to get out of all of this, and the between the governor's bill, the House and Senate bill, we're going to get another really good tax bill.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really exciting. And one thing I forgot to mention about the House and Senate bill today is that it also makes a change to the corporate side. And so right now in the current law, the rate will fall to eventually a flat 5%.
Mm-hmm.
The House and Senate will move that to 4.9%, a flat rate.
Yeah.
So that's
that's good. We focus more on the individual income tax, but the corporate income tax needs to continue to come down as well, where possible. So.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is really exciting. In fact, I truly believe that Iowa's in position to be the national leader on state fiscal policy.
Absolutely.
And they seem to understand what needs to be done.
Yep. Well said. All right. Well, that's what's going on. Yeah. There's the real legislative update.
Yes.
We're all over the place on the last episode, but this is the main event for Iowa taxpayers. So, all right, that's all we got for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. John, have you liked on YouTube yet?
I have not. I forgot.
Good grief.
I'm going to write myself a note.
All right. No, I'm going to write you a note. Yeah. It's going in your personnel file.
Yeah.
All right. So don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. With that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.